2026 promises to be another huge year on the global political front. Defence and budget concerns will be at the fore in Europe, while the United States will celebrate its 250th birthday and host the G20 and the FIFA Men's World Cup. So, can Europe get its act together? And what sort of welcome can the world expect from President Trump? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, a new year is here and set to bring new challenges. Russia's war in Ukraine shows no sign of ending, and as a result, several European countries are continuing to spend more and more on defence. Hungary will hold elections in April, while American voters will have their say on President Trump's work so far when they go to the polls for crucial midterm elections. 2026 looms large, but what else will it bring? Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say, here with me in the studio, we have the political broadcaster, Adam Boulton. Greg Swenson is chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. And Mary Dejevski, a foreign affairs columnist at The Independent. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Greg, to you first of all, 2026 will see your country celebrate 250 years of existence. You are going to host the G20 and the FIFA Men's Soccer World Cup. So it's a huge year for President Trump.
Yeah, absolutely huge year. And 2 years later, you have the Olympics and another presidential election. But in the meantime, we do have the midterms. That could be a bit of a wrinkle for the country and especially for the Republican Party. But other than that, optimism is huge right now in America. It's not just the World Cup and the 250. It's, the economic, the peace and prosperity, economic opportunity. A lot of the policies that the president and the administration have put into place take 9 or 12 months to kick in. Same with President Biden. His inflation didn't come till 9 to 12 months after his policies and the spending. So that's just natural for new administrations. So there's a lot of optimism.
What's the mood like in the Republican camp then?
Well, it's a little bit concerning because of the off-year elections and the special elections, which, you saw maybe a 10-point gap close between, how the president performed in 24. The big challenge for us is that when President Trump is not on the ballot, people tend to stay home. And so we're going to have to fix the turnout problem because he will not be on the ballot next November for the midterm. So it's really important that we improve on our voter participation, which has always lagged for Republicans. Special elections and off years, the Democrats do much better on turnout.
Thank you, Greg. Mary, how concerned do you think President Trump should be about those midterms then in November 2026?
I think he should probably be quite concerned about them because I think a lot of us looked at the elections just earlier this month, at the end of this year, and we looked at those and the results were very mixed. It wasn't a complete mandate for Trump, but it wasn't completely negative either. It was very, very difficult to read. And when you saw the White House encounter between the new mayor of New York City and Donald Trump, and you saw what is essentially, in some ways, a meeting of minds and styles, then it was, as it were, the other part of America. You thought, is this the part of America that is actually going to come back at the midterms? And if so, that is worse news for Donald Trump in a way than the result of the mayor's election in New York.
Adam, just come in on your predictions for Trump in 2026.
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind is, irrespective of Trump, a second-term president after the midterms is generally viewed as a lame duck. So clearly, I know there's been talk about Trump 2028, but he said he's not going to run again. So clearly, the internal political debate in America is going to move towards the next cycle, who are going to be the candidates for the two main parties, and obviously their various contenders in the shadow of Trump on the Republican side, and possibly the Democrats, not quite formed, but you've got Newsom there. And obviously, we can't predict what the outcome of the midterms will be, but if the House were to go Democratic, that would give more problems to the Trump administration irrespective of what happens in the Senate. And all of this points to me to say, from the perspective of the rest of the world, America's political preoccupations are going to be domestic, along with the 250th anniversary celebrations. So that would seem to me that Trump's interventions on the world stage, on the question in the Middle East and on the question in Ukraine, for example, is going to be even less focused than it has been so far, which, for the rest of the world, frankly, may or may not be a good thing, but it certainly means that Europe is going to have to step up, probably. Saudi Arabian parties in the Middle East are going to have to step up, because I think America will be preoccupied elsewhere. And of course, there is a big question over the 250th anniversary. Donald Trump clearly wants to make that the celebration of Donald Trump, with the building of the Trump Arch and the new ballroom in the White House. And obviously, he would like to crown that with the Nobel Peace Prize, which doesn't look like it's going. So I think, it's going to be fascinating. You mentioned the World Cup. Fascinating, because we've got America sharing that with Canada, where they're not really on particularly good terms at the moment. We've got Mexico to the south. We've got Donald Trump already talking about maybe denying visas to some of the countries which are participating. You got him saying that in cities where he doesn't think there's security, which tend to be democratic controlled, he might order the games to be played in other cities. So I think we'll be looking at America. We'll still be preoccupied with Trump, which is the way he likes it. He likes to be the focus of attention, but actually, I suspect the rest of the world will have to get on with its business.
Thanks, Adam. Greg, will we continue to see the United States take a step back from European security and that whole narrative that we had throughout 2025?
I don't think so. And the reason is, Adam brings up a good point. The president was surprisingly focused on foreign policy in the first 9 months, 10 months of the administration. And I think that cost us a bit in these off-year elections, because, he campaigned on the economy and shutting the border. He shut the border, but he kind of stopped talking about the economy as much as he typically does. And he talked about Israel, and he talked about all the conflicts that he's had a hand in stopping. So I thought he did much more foreign policy than we expected. Now, because of the midterms, he's got to focus on domestic issues. After the midterms, if the Democrats win, he has less control over the purse strings, obviously, because the Congress controls that. I think he'll focus more on foreign policy. I think that's a way where he can, because the executive has so much more power on foreign policy than they do on purse strings and spending and domestic issues. He's got to get buy-in from the Senate and the House especially the House, on domestic issues. So I kind of disagree. I think he might
pivot this time next year, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly.
I'm talking about,
Yeah, but you're right about that. Oh, yes, absolutely. He is going to pivot to domestic issues, I think, quite a bit.
Thanks, Greg. Mary, the war in Ukraine drags on. Everyone will be watching to see what 2026 brings for Ukraine and its people and the levels of support. Have we reached really chronic fatigue levels in terms of European support?
Well, personally, I sort of think we have. I think Europe is more divided than it tries to present itself as. I also think the bigger problem might be less Europe than actually Ukraine itself, because Ukraine is running out of people, and it's running out of the will to fight. And it puts a very good and positive gloss on all this. Zelensky is a fantastic salesman, even after all these months of war. He came as a peace leader. He's going to leave office probably as a war leader. But Ukraine has limited capacity, and Russia's capacity is much, much greater. And it's very, very hard to see this ending. Well, it's very hard for me to see it going on very, very much longer. I think we're probably talking about weeks or months rather than years. And we're also looking at a result which the Europeans really probably don't want. And then it'll be very interesting to watch how they try to spin it and how they try to maximize whatever Ukraine is able to come away with.
Thanks, Mary. Adam, just looking at Vladimir Putin in 2026, he will probably feel quite emboldened, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, I agree with lots of Mary's analysis, but I also think we underestimate the strain which there is on the Russian economy and on the Russian war effort. And I think we're almost at a pivot where it's clearly a very difficult time for Ukraine at the moment. And that clearly is something that Donald Trump and Witkoff, with their instinct for this kind of thing, have focused. However, I think if this can be ridden over into the winter, I think one can see a scenario where Europe, in spite of its divisions, actually realizes that, the option is that Europe is going to have to intervene more heavily, or they're going to end up with an aggressive Russia directly on their borders. So I think the thing could swing back. I think it's a moment of terror, danger at the moment. I agree entirely with Mary, but I think you can see a scenario
Where it swings back.
where it swings back in the other direction. And then I think some of the real pressures on Putin will become clear. I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about next year is, these strong men, how much have they got in the tank left? I mean, Donald Trump's going to be 80 next year. He clearly is falling asleep quite a lot in meetings. America got very worried about, lost confidence in Biden in that way. We don't really know what's going on with Xi, but he certainly has been through a very rough patch. And even Putin, is talking about living forever, but he's getting older. So,
But
you know,
so, when you look at the pictures and the videos of Putin now, Putin 3 years ago, Putin 10 years ago, he has aged. And, while I actually contest, how much Russia actually, how much capacity Russia has left, and I probably, on a different side. But, things can change
exactly.
absolutely like overnight, in seconds, and you cannot rule that out.
Thanks, Mary. Greg, to you, your man Trump, Adam points out that he's getting on. How much has he got left in the tank then in 2026?
Snapshot right now, he has got a ton of energy. And I think anytime he takes a weekend off or plays golf for a Saturday, the media, which is the leftist media in the US, which is most of it, will start creating these stories. And it's just fake news. He has got a ton of energy. However, to your point, Adam, the actuary tables don't lie. That's just math, right? If he's 79 and, the average life expectancy or the likelihood of having a health issue in the next 3 years, just actuarially is obvious. And so you can't ignore that, even though not just for a man his age, but for a man of any age, he sleeps 4 hours a night. He's crushing it this term as much as much or more as he was in his first term, in spite of being 8 years older.
Thank you.
5 years old.
Mary, let's talk budgets. EU budget is a big one in 2026. Ursula von der Leyen will be very keen to get that over the line.
She will indeed, and it's very interesting watching the sort of gamesmanship that's already in progress in Brussels, with lots of people competing. And of course, one of the big questions, which also has to do with budgets, is enlargement. And enlargement has been completely paralysed, really, for however many years. And we've got Ukraine, and we've got Georgia, and we've got the whole of the Western Balkans, all of them absolutely desperate to join the EU as quickly as they can. And a whole lot of European countries, including one country which is professedly very much in favour of Ukraine, which is Poland, having great misgivings about Ukraine. So I think that the arguments about the budget are going to be meshed with the arguments about enlargement. Because when you talk to people, say, for instance, in small countries which are recipient countries, even now, like the Baltic states, they say, well, if enlargement happens, then we're going to go overnight from being recipients to donor countries. And everybody is looking at their economies and their possible contributions and whatnot. They're worried. And then there's the security aspect and the military. which has not been, in the past, it's not really been an issue because that's been handed over to NATO. But increasingly, it becomes an issue depending on how much the United States and Trump is going to remain a presence in Europe.
Thank you, Mary. Adam, talk to me about the United Kingdom in 2026. Keir Starmer, where does he go? Nigel Farage is coming up hot on his heels with Reform UK.
Well, I just make one part on the European thing, which is that the difference this spending round is that Germany is not in a position to dominate and to simply say we're going to pick up the tag. And obviously you've got political pressure on Merz coming from Alternative for Deutschland, and France has also, got 1 year to go, possibly a Macron, the likelihood of a government collapsing. So that makes it much more difficult because, in a sense, there isn't a big player in the room who can just say, okay, in the end, this is what we're all going to agree. Because I don't think Merz, although he's been a stronger leader than his predecessor, I don't think he's in a position to do that. Now, the UK is in a really interesting position because it has now become generally accepted that Brexit was a mistake, but equally, it's become generally accepted that it's not on the cards, and I don't think it is, for the UK to rejoin. So we have probably, in terms of policy appeal, Labour moving towards a position where they're going to say an important thing is that we cooperate more with Europe and we move towards single market and all the rest of it. Problem is there's no money. So actually, when it comes to active cooperation, the sort of things that the Europeans would like to see out of the British, such as cooperating on space program or cooperating in particular on this new defence pact where Britain had a leading role, it appears that the Starmer government is going in the other direction and saying, actually, we're not going to pay to play with the other Europeans. So that on foreign policy, that just leaves them in a straddle as they are on so many different policies. And the big thing for us, I think bigger probably than usual, is we've got, quotes, our own midterm elections coming up in May, where we've got elections for the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and major elections in the UK. Now, Wales has always been dominated by the Labour Party, the governing party of the UK at the moment. Scotland, Labour, it was a Labour fiefdom, although now there's a nationalist movement. And in the UK, of course, they won the election, whatever their share of the vote. Now, if they go backwards, as the opinion polls suggest they will, that will undoubtedly provoke a government crisis, which could well lead either to the ousting and or an early general election. So it's a really perilous moment, I think, for the government next May. Interestingly, equally perilous probably for the main opposition party, the Conservative Party, because unless they can show that they are still the alternative force in UK-wide politics, it seems likely that they could be overtaken by radical right party in the form of Reform UK. And again, that would completely
Muddy the waters.
rewrite, if you like, the national dialogue. So, we're going to be focused, I think, more than ever on these local elections. And we do have to remember that the whole history of Britain in the 20th century, 21st century, has been driven by off-year elections. That is where Nigel Farage, now the favourite to be the next Prime Minister, gained his foothold by winning in these elections, which people said, well, they're not general elections, they don't really matter. Well, it turned out they mattered a lot.
Greg, to you, I know you have some concerns about the flight of capital from various different European countries in the past year. Do you think that will continue in 2026? What I mean is the wealthy moving away.
Maybe not at the pace that we saw last year, although some of the numbers I'm seeing are similar, but not much worse. Let's put it that way. But the UK still leads the world in the mass exodus of capital, regardless of the source. And they're in different number, but it's obvious, right? Number two is China and India, with much bigger populations and a lot more wealth. But the UK, sadly, is leading the world in that. The biggest recipient is the UAE, where there's very low or no income taxes. Number two is the United States, because our taxes are much lower, even though we still have income tax. But it's still the land of opportunity. And number three is Italy, where the tax the tax scheme is attracting a lot of people. Big players from the city of London have moved over there. You pay 200,000 euros, and that's it, no matter how much money you make. So it's a flat tax, an absolute flat tax, and it's working for Italy.
Can I just ask you, the past 12 months, we know as viewers of Roundtable will know you've left the UK because of the taxation
That's right.
situation. You went home to the States. Do you regret that?
No, because I don't want to give half of my money to the HMRC, nor do I want to give half of my children's money. I love it here. I wish I was living here full time. I was here for 10 years, 11 months a year, and we're exploiting our 90 days as best we can. Kept a home here, and it's a great place.
Well, we're
A
grateful.
rough patch, but I'm optimistic it will come
We're
back.
grateful you chose to spend one of those days on Roundtable, Greg. So thank you. Mary, let's talk about President Xi. What can we expect from China in 2026? More expansion, more ambition?
Well, I think what we've seen over the past couple of years is Xi and China generally being very patient and very measured. That's not the image that other people present, especially not the bits of the US Congress, which see China as enemy in waiting, and Xi Jinping just sort of girding himself to pounce on Taiwan and or to cement a closer relationship with Russia. And those two things are obviously completely inimical to everything that the United States, indeed the West in general, would want. But when you actually look at how Xi Jinping speaks and how he behaves and what he does, if you look at specifically about relations with Russia, they've never got close enough to the point of being characterized as anything like an alliance. This is a totally pragmatic, mutually advantageous relationship, which can ebb and flow depending on demands on either side. And it was interesting for me that Xi Jinping was one of the possibly, and the archives in years' time will tell us whether this is really true, he seems to have been one of the most restraining influences on Putin in relation to Ukraine. He has been very much against any sort of escalation that would even touch the possibility of nuclear potential. He's told Putin in no uncertain terms not to use the nuclear threat. And he was also instrumental early on in trying to broker a peace deal. It actually came to nothing, and now that duty has passed to all sorts of other people. But it was absolutely clear that although one idea in the West is that China is basically underwriting Russia's war, I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's been true from the beginning, and I don't think it's something that China wants.
Thank you, Mary. Adam, just looking closer to Europe, Macron of France, how long do you give him?
Well, I think he'll serve a full term. I mean, he can do, however many governments are voted down, that doesn't directly affect him. And I mean, he's unpopular, but whether there's a will for anyone else, particularly given, as we've talked about on Roundtable before, um, a question mark over Marine Le Pen would be able to replace him at an early election, or indeed at the election 2027. I think all of that solidifies his position. I mean, there's no doubt about it that the French economy is probably doing even worse than the British economy at the moment, and there could be a crisis, and also it appears, in spite of being told by their politicians, that the French people are just completely unrealistic on what their economic options are. So it looks like another year of turmoil. I would just say on China that, we had the major foreign policy speech by the British Prime Minister at the Guildhall, which majored on China and relations with China. Unfortunately, I think it just showed how confused the UK is about its relations with China, that we've had a lot of debate about Chinese espionage. There's been a big row over China wanting to build an embassy, a big embassy right in the heart of London. I think it's quite clear that the government supports that idea, but keeps on delaying announcing it because it's fearful of it. And yet, at the same time, as Keir Starmer is saying, oh, there's great opportunity in China. I'm going to visit Xi next year. A lot of British politicians are saying, oh, well, you can't trust China, and why aren't they really an enemy? So it's yet another area where, there really is no leadership.
Thank you, Adam. Greg, final point to you. 2026, I'm a huge football fan. Ireland may qualify, Turkey may qualify, England, Scotland already there, Wales might qualify via the playoffs as well. What kind of a welcome can we expect to the United
I
States?
think it's going to be incredible. And you have a lot of football fans in the U.S., and that wasn't the case a few generations ago. When I was a child, it just wasn't on the radar, but it has really caught on since the late 70s, 80s. So we had the World Cup in 1994 in the U.S. Sadly, there will be no games, at least for now, in Chicago. I'm not sure why they passed the second biggest city in America and massive sports fans in Chicago. But no, I think it'll be exciting. Also, be good to to have Canada and Mexico involved, as Adam pointed out. So I think this is going to be a great moment for America to kind of show off, in spite of some of the challenges that we have in some of these cities where the games will be. But we do a pretty good job.
And a G20 as well to look forward to.
That's right. That's right. At a Trump golf course, I assume, and it'll be a big year.
Huge year ahead. We wish you a very happy new year, Greg, and to Mary and Adam as well. Thank you for all your insight and analysis on the year ahead. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching. We wish you a very happy new year indeed.